Let's look at the question, what is the simple interest on a loan of $30,000 for 1 year if the interest rate is 2.25%? For a question like this, we need to refer to our simple interest formula, which is I equals PRT, where I is the interest, what we want, P is the principal, the amount we start with, R is the rate, and T is time. And we're just going to put the appropriate numbers in the right spots. So, if I is equal to PRT, interest is what we want. We're starting with $30,000. Multiply that times our rate, which was 2.25%. Now, anytime we put in a rate, we want to make sure it's written as a decimal, not a percentage. So I would not put in 2.25 in here. I've been put in 0.0225, then times 1 year. And the reason is 2.25%. I need to change to a decimal, which means dividing by 100, and the effect of that is moving the decimal point once, twice to the left, which means I need a 0. So 0.0225. I'll put them into my calculator to find the amount of interest that I would earn, which in this case would be $675. And that would be my answer. Let's look at the question, if Sarah borrows $1,000 for 4 years at 13% annual simple interest rate, how much interest will Sarah pay? To do this problem, we want to look at our simple interest formula. I equals PRT, where I is the interest, what we want, P is the principal, what we start with, R is the rate, and T is time. So using my simple interest formula, I equals PRT, interest is what I want, principal is $1,000, the rate we said is 13%. Now rates in problems like this, when we put them into an equation, we want to put them in as decimals. We never want to put them in as percentages. So you put in 0.13, because 13%, to translate to a decimal, we divide by 100, the effect of which is take the decimal point, which is currently right here after the 3, 2 spaces to the left, so hence the 0.13. T we set over the course of 4 years. Once we have this, it's a matter of multiplying them out, and in this case we get $520. So can we do 1,000 times 0.13 times 4 to get $520, our total interest. Let's look at the question, what is the interest earned on an account with an initial investment of $12.50 at a 4.5% annual simple interest rate for 6 months? Find the interest, we want to use our simple interest formula, which is I equals P R times T, where I is the interest, P is principal, R is the rate, and T is time. 1250 is our principal, 4.5% is the rate, 6 months is the time. For our simple interest formula, time is usually given in terms of years. So in this case it's given in terms of months. We want to convert it into years to make our equation work. First of all, we know what our principal is. It's going to be $12.50. Our interest rate is 4.5%. Now in an equation like this, we want to insert it as a decimal. We never want to put it in as a percent. So 4.5%, to change to a decimal, I divide by 100. The effect of which means I move my decimal point once, twice to the left. And here I need a space filler. So this translates to the decimal, 0.045. Now for my time of 6 months, I need to convert that to years, so I need to think in 6 months out of 1 year, what is 6 divided by 12? That's going to be 1/2. So this is over the course of a half year, so we put in 0.5 for the time. And always we want more time to be given in years with these kinds of problems. When we multiply everything else, we'll end up with 28.125. Now this is a monetary value, so it only makes sense to have 2 decimal places. So I'm going to round to the nearest hundredth spot. So my 5 will be rounded to up to a 3. So we'll say in this case, after 6 months, $28.13 cents is earned in simple interest. Let's look at the question. Sarah needs $15,000 for college in 6 years. If she invests $5,000 now, what simple annual rate is necessary for the investment to grow to $15,000 in 6 years? Since we're using simple annual rate, we'll use our simple interest formula. I equals PRT. I is our interest, P is the principal, R is the rate, and T is time. Time is given in years. Sarah needs $15,000, has $5,000 already. Using this formula, this gives us interest. However, it doesn't give us overall value. How much interest do we need? In other words, what's the difference from $15,000 to 5? That's going to be $10,000. The interest we want is $10,000. We want $10,000 of interest. So using our formula, I equals PRT. Again, we want $15,000. We have $5,000. The difference is the interest that we want to make up. So 10,000 equals. We started with $5,000. The rate is what we don't know. We're trying to figure that out. And time is 6 years. So I put that in as well. I can simplify my right side and say 5,000 times 6 will give me 30,000. So now I have 30,000 times R. Solve for R. I'll divide each side by 30,000. So my R is equal to 10,000 over 30,000. And if I reduce, I'm left with 1/3. Now, I need it as a percentage. So as a percentage, if I divide 1 by 3, I'll get 0.333 repeating. As a percentage, I need to convert this by multiplying by 100. Now I have 33.3 repeating percent. And that would be my answer. So we say we'll need an interest rate of 33.3% to gain that $10,000 in interest over 6 years. Let's look at the question. If the annual simple interest rate at a bank is 10%, how many years does Maria need to leave her $4,000 in the bank so that she doubles the value? Since we're talking about a simple interest rate at a bank, we need to use our simple interest formula, which is I equals PRT, I being interest, P being the principal, or what we start with, R is the rate, and T is time. So we've been given the initial amount, $4,000. We have our principal. We have the rate too. The question is, how many years does she need? So it's asking for time. Principal was $4,000. Rate was 10%. Now in questions like this, we want our percentages to be entered in as decimals. 10%, I divide by 100 to make it into a decimal. The effect is this decimal point moves 2 spaces to the left. So 0.1 or 0.10. My decimal. Time is what we're trying to figure out. How long will it take? Now it says till her investment doubles. So in other words, she wants to have $8,000. Now we can only calculate interest, so we have to consider how much interest does it take, or do we add on to 4,000 so that we double the value? Well, what's double the value of 4,000? It's 8,000. Which means we want the interest here to total $4,000, because that would allow us to double the initial amount. So what we're trying to figure out is, and here's our time, what value for t, what value for time allows us to make $4,000 in interest. Simplifying my right side, I'll make this 400 times t, and to solve for t, I'll divide each side by 400. I can reduce. Now I'm left with 40 over 4, which I will reduce to 10. So specifically, I need to say this tells me that 10 years will need to pass before I can double the initial investment, or Maria can double her initial investment, going at this rate. Let's look at the question. Leroy buys a $1,200 computer. Store gives him credit using simple interest at 20% over 2 years. How much does Leroy pay for his computer? With questions like these, we're looking at the total amount paid as opposed to just interest. Even though we're using simple interest, we're going to use a slightly modified formula. So if we're calculating total cost as opposed to just interest, we have two possibilities for formulas: a equals p plus I, or a equals p plus PRT. They're the same formulas, except in the one on the left, I simply represents interest, when the one on the right spells it out from the original equation, I equals PRT. Either one is valid. You're doing the same amount of work either way. P is still principal, R is still rate, and T is still time. So I first need to figure out what is the interest that's being charged to him over these 2 years on this purchase. Then, since that has to be paid, I add that back onto the original amount that he paid for the computer. That becomes our total cost. So I can say amounts equal to P plus PRT. My principal I know is $1,200. My rate was 20%, and my time was 2 years. So to find out my total cost, I need to figure out first the interest that Leroy accrued over this 2-year period of time. Interest meaning, in this case, what he has to pay in addition to the original value of his computer. So put in our values. 1,200 times the rate. With rate, we want to change our percentage into decimals. We never want to put a number in percent form into an equation like this for rate. Always change it to a decimal, which means I'll divide by 100, taking the decimal point and moving it 2 spaces to the left. So the rate that I actually want is 0.2. T is 2 years. The other P for principal is still my 1,200. So again, in the first part of this expression, I'm just putting in my principal as was given to me. In the second part, I'm figuring out the interest on that investment. Just the interest. So when I multiply the numbers out, I'll end up with 1,200 plus 480. So this means that Leroy is going to accrue $480 worth of interest. I need to add that onto the amount he paid for the computer to get the total cost. So 1,200 plus 480 gives me $1,680. Let's look at the question. Use the following credit card statement to determine the amount of interest for the given statement period. So we're assuming simple interest. It means I can use my I equals PRT formula because I want the amount of interest. So I need to figure out what is my principal. Now when I'm paying something back, my principal is, for example, a monthly payment on a mortgage. That's the same thing. Whereas in this case, it's the amount that I'm paying each for the month, for the time frame that I have. In this case, my principal is the beginning balance, what I've already charged to my card. That's my principal, that's my initial investment. Then the interest is added, is what I actually have to pay extra in addition to that original amount put down. So the beginning balance that I have is 125. So using my simple interest formula, I know my APR, my rate, my annual percentage rate is 23%. Now time, since it's not in years, it's just set from December 15th through January 14th. When you count the number of days, including those two, we come out to 34 days out of a 365-day year. My principal is what my payments are, 125. The rate, 23%, changes to 0.23. Remember, 23%, when I divide by 100 to change to a decimal, I move my decimal point 2 spaces to the left to make 0.23. Now, as I said, time, since we're talking about 1 year, we spent 34 days for this particular loan out of a 365-day year. So now to determine the amount of interest, I multiply my 3 numbers together. When you do the math, you should come out with I equals 2.6780. Now since I'm talking about money, I'll round this to 2 decimal spaces. 2.68. In other words, $2.68 is the amount of interest earned over this time period.